Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, December 13, 2023. Hunter Biden defies a subpoena from a House committee to testify in closed session in the Republican-led impeachment inquiry of his father, President Joe Biden. Hunter Biden instead makes a statement outside the U.S. Capitol building apologizing for his past bad personal behavior, saying my father was not financially involved in my business, and saying he would testify only in open hearing. Just ahead, Hunter Biden and the Republicans' response. Meanwhile, on the House floor, the House passes a resolution on party lines to formally authorize the impeachment inquiry of President Biden. The Federal Reserve keeps interest rates where they are for a third consecutive meeting as Wall Street rallies on the forecast that there'll be 3 interest rate cuts next year. We'll hear from the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and talk with MarketWatch senior reporter Greg Robb. A framework of a deal for U.S. immigration and border security policy changes may be coming together between congressional Republicans and Democrats and the White House that will allow President Biden's $60 billion aid request for Ukraine to pass, as Republicans have insisted those two issues move as one. The White House has asked about the president reportedly saying that Israel is engaging in indiscriminate bombing in Gaza in the war with Hamas. U.S. Special Envoy for Climate John Kerry talks about the UN Climate Summit agreement on the transition away from fossil fuels. U.S. debates a bill that allows whole and 2% milk back into school meals. And Larry Doby, the second Major League Baseball player to break the color barrier, is awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. This story from the New York Times. Hunter Biden, the president's son, appeared on Capitol Hill on Wednesday morning to offer to publicly testify in House Republicans' impeachment investigation into his father, though he insisted he would not appear for a private deposition they scheduled over his refusals. The younger Mr. Biden, who has been served a subpoena to testify, spoke to reporters in a hastily called news conference outside the Capitol across the complex from a House office building where Republican lawmakers were waiting to question him behind closed doors. It was a dramatic moment that came just hours before House Republicans were to vote to formalize their impeachment inquiry into President Biden after a year of investigation that has turned up no concrete evidence of high crimes or misdemeanors. That was the New York Times reporting. Here's part of Hunter Biden's statement.
Let me state as clearly as I can. My father was not financially involved in my business, not as a practicing lawyer, not as a board member of Burisma, not in my partnership with a Chinese private businessman, not in my investments at home nor abroad, and certainly not as an artist. During my battle with addiction, my parents were there for me. They literally saved my life. They helped me in ways that I will never be able to repay. And of course, they would never expect me to. And in the depths of my addiction, I was extremely irresponsible with my finances. But to suggest that is grounds for an impeachment inquiry is beyond the absurd. It's shameless. There's no evidence to support the allegations that my father was financially involved in my business because it did not happen. James Comer, Jim Jordan, Jason Smith, and their colleagues have distorted the facts by cherry-picking lines from a bank statement, manipulating texts I sent, editing the testimony of my friends and former business partners, and misstating personal information that was stolen from me. There is no fairness or decency in what these Republicans are doing. They have lied over and over about every aspect of my personal and professional life. So much so that their lies have become the false facts believed by too many people. No matter how many times it is debunked, they continue to insist that my father's support of Ukraine against Russia is the result of a non-existent bribe. They displayed naked photos of me during an oversight hearing. And they have taken the light of my dad's love, for me, and presented it as darkness. They have no shame. These same committee chairmen have engaged in unprecedented political interference in what would have already been a 5-year investigation of me. Yet, here I am, Mr. Chairman, taking up your offer when you said we can bring these people in for depositions or committee hearings, whichever they choose. Well, I've chosen. I am here to testify at a public hearing today to answer any of the committee's legitimate questions. Republicans do not want an open process where Americans can see their tactics, expose their baseless inquiry, or hear what I have to say. What are they afraid of? I'm here. I'm ready.
Hunter Biden, son of the president, outside the U.S. Capitol building in Washington. Across the street in a House office building, Congressman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, chair of the Oversight and Accountability Committee, and Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, a member of that committee and also chair of the Judiciary Committee, two of the committees been working on the impeachment inquiry of President Biden, spoke to reporters outside the room where their scheduled closed-door deposition of Hunter Biden was to have taken place.
Chairman Jordan and I have been very clear. We issued a lawful subpoena to the president's son. This has been a 10-month investigation, a credible, transparent investigation that has produced a lot of troubling evidence. We have lots of questions. Hopefully you all have had an opportunity to go in the committee room and see the boxes of documents that we've accumulated, tens of thousands of pages of documents. We have lots of specific questions. This is an investigation about public corruption at the highest levels of our government. The American people expect Congress to investigate this because I think one thing that Chairman Jordan's proven is the FBI, the DOJ, and the IRS, as we've heard from the whistleblowers, have all dropped the ball. So the House Oversight and House Judiciary Committee are conducting this credible investigation that an overwhelming majority of Americans want. We have specific questions for the president's son. He does not get to dictate the terms of this subpoena. So with that, I'll turn over to Chairman Jordan.
I would just point out that I've had a chance now to review what Hunter Biden said in his press conference, and I think he made an interesting statement. He said his father was not financially involved in the business. And I think that qualifier, the word financially, is important because once again it shows another change in this story. First it was no involvement, then no, I never talked to anyone, and then we find out about the dinners, the meetings, the phone calls, and everything else. Now it's okay, he wasn't involved in the business financially. I think that is important. It's one of the reasons we want to talk to Hunter Biden. Second thing I would say is this: in a few hours, I think the House of Representatives is going to pass the impeachment inquiry, and that is an important step. If you talk to any scholars in this, I think we could proceed as we did under Speaker McCarthy where he announced it, but this is an important step. The impeachment power resides solely with the House of Representatives. If a majority of the House now says we're in an official impeachment inquiry as part of our constitutional duty to do oversight, that carries weight. That's going to help us get these witnesses in. And maybe most importantly, regarding this morning's activities, this is the argument that the White House and Hunter Biden's counsel used to say he shouldn't come. Okay, we disagree. We thought he should have been here. But when we take that vote this afternoon, what's our argument going to be then? We think he should come in. And if he doesn't, we're going to move forward with contempt proceedings. There's a process we have to follow, but we plan to do that.
Congressman Jim Jordan and Congressman James Comer, both Republicans, leaders of two of the three committees who have been conducting the impeachment inquiry of President Biden, talking to reporters outside the meeting room in the House office building where the Oversight Committee had planned to depose Hunter Biden behind closed doors. From a USA Today article, Congressman Comer has accused Hunter Biden of being at the center of a web of 20 shell companies that receive millions of dollars from foreign entities in Ukraine, China, and elsewhere, and allegedly funneled money to his father. The accusations, which Hunter Biden and the White House have called baseless, are at the heart of the impeachment inquiry. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee held their own news conference to respond to Hunter Biden's statement. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York is the vice-ranking Democrat.
They launched an impeachment inquiry without a House floor vote already, and their own witness, the own Republican witness, said that there are, from what he has seen, there are not grounds for an impeachment inquiry, or rather, frankly, impeachment in general, of President Biden. But that has not deterred the Republican side from continuing to try to force through a completely groundless and unsubstantiated, I won't even call it an investigation, I'll just call it an exercise in futility. What we've seen from this deposition, Chairman Comer himself told Hunter Biden, you choose. Whichever you choose, come in public and come in private. Hunter Biden, in an attempt to clear his name from what has been happening publicly, has stated that he is willing to testify to the public. But because the Republican investigation has been debunked, exposed, and consistently covered and exposed as having falsehoods, they decided that they will take back and rescind their offer of a public investigation and will only allow it to happen in private, and they will not even commit to making any of these transcripts, or have had a track history of not making these transcripts public either.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, news conference with other Democrats on the Oversight and Accountability Committee after Hunter Biden showed up on Capitol Hill, made a statement on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol, saying that he would testify, but not in the closed session that the Republicans on the committee had set up. Early Wednesday evening, the House voted to authorize the impeachment inquiry of President Biden. It was along party lines, Republicans voting yes and Democrats voting no.
On this vote, the yeas are 221 and the nays are 212. The resolution is adopted.
From NBC News, the Supreme Court on Wednesday agreed to hear an appeal brought by a man charged with offenses related to the January 6, 2021 assault on the U.S. Capitol in a case that could have a major impact on the criminal prosecution of former President Donald Trump. And this story from NBC News, the Supreme Court on Wednesday took up a high-stakes legal battle that could lead to a definitive decision on whether the drug most commonly used for medication abortions will continue to be easily available, including by mail. The court agreed to weigh appeals from the Biden administration and drug maker Danco, defending several Food and Drug Administration decisions that made it easier to access and use the mifepristone pill. Danco makes the brand version of the pill. This is Washington Today. The Federal Reserve, writes Associated Press, kept its key interest rate unchanged Wednesday for a third straight time, and its officials signaled that they expect to make 3 quarter-point cuts to their benchmark rate next year. Speaking at a news conference, the chair, Jerome Powell, said that the Fed officials are likely done raising interest rates because of how steadily inflation has cooled.
Inflation has eased from its highs, and this has come without a significant increase in unemployment. That's very good news. But inflation is still too high, ongoing progress in bringing it down is not assured, and the path forward is uncertain. As we look ahead to next year, I want to assure the American people that we're fully committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal. Restoring price stability is essential to achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. Since early last year, the FOMC has significantly tightened the stance of monetary policy. We've raised our policy interest rate by 5.25 percentage points and have continued to reduce our securities holdings at a brisk pace. Our actions have moved our policy rate well into restrictive territory, meaning that tight policy is putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation, and the full effects of our tightening likely have not yet been felt. Today, we decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings. Given how far we have come, along with the uncertainties and risks that we face, the committee is proceeding carefully. We will make decisions about the extent of any additional policy firming and how long policy will remain restrictive based on the totality of the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks.
The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at a news conference at the Federal Reserve Building in Washington, D.C. A reporter asked him whether the U.S. economy has achieved or will achieve the so-called soft landing, that is, no recession, from the interest rate increases.
Hi, Chair Powell. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Thanks for taking our questions. At this point, can you confidently say that the economy has avoided a recession and isn't heading for one now? And if the answer is no, I'm curious about what you'd still be looking for.
I think you can say that there's little basis for thinking that the economy is in a recession now. I would say that. I think there's always a probability that there will be a recession in the next year, and it's a meaningful probability no matter what the economy is doing. So it's always a real possibility. The question is it? So it's a possibility here. I have always felt since the beginning that there was a possibility, because of the unusual situation, that the economy could cool off in a way that enabled inflation to come down without the kind of large job losses that have often been associated with high inflation and tightening cycles. So far, that's what we're seeing. That's what many forecasters on and off the committee are seeing. This result is not guaranteed. It is far too early to declare victory. And there are certainly risks. It's certainly possible that the economy will behave in an unexpected way. It has done that repeatedly through in the post-pandemic period. Nonetheless, where we are is we see the things that I mentioned.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. On Wall Street, the Dow up 512, NASDAQ up 200, S&P up 63. Joining us now on the phone is Greg Robb, senior reporter for MarketWatch. Thanks for being on Washington today. The Fed not changing interest rates today, but the headline, 3 expected rate cuts next year, and the markets reacted enthusiastically.
Yes, they did. They sure did. Markets had been expecting a lecture from Powell, saying that they had gotten ahead of themselves and that the Fed wasn't going to cut so much. But Powell sort of met them halfway, and he penciled in more rate cuts next year than they had thought. And he sounded really kind of dovish. So the market just took off and ran. Was really happy with the outcome, for sure.
Always questions to the Fed chair about the chance of a soft landing, no recession. What's the outlook?
It's very interesting. I think most of the economists I talk to think there's going to be a recession next year. They've been expecting a recession now for 18 months, so it's a little bit like the boy who cried wolf. But they're still there for 2024. I think we're going to know in the next couple of months, by March or April, if the economy is weakening. There's signs of it, but we haven't seen too much yet. Powell doesn't think there's going to be one. That's what a soft landing is. He thinks that the economy is going to slow, but sort of manage to stay out of the ditch. A recession is a ditch. But most economists think that there's a possibility, which, of course, is bad news for President Biden.
Inflation is now around 3%. The Fed target is 2%. How hard is it to get rid of that 1%?
Well, that's the key question now. Most economists that I talk to, or a lot of economists I talk to, think the last mile is the hard one. Excuse me. That some of the things that are sticky about inflation, like services, having your lawn mowed and stuff like that, is always going to cost a little bit more this year. So the Fed rate hikes don't really get at that kind of stuff. So there is a big school of economists who think that the last mile is going to be tough. But, Powell said today, and looking at the data is just looking good. So inflation is kind of coming down on a nice, smooth trajectory, and the unemployment rate has stayed really low. So far, so good. But it is something that's going to be bearing watching the next couple of months.
We're talking with Greg Robb, a reporter with MarketWatch. Also, during these news conferences with the Fed Chair Jerome Powell, there's a lot of parsing of his language. Anything new or noteworthy this time?
I think he was pretty clear this time. He had a lot of cautious. He said a lot of cautious things like, "Oh, we're not sure about cutting rates." He also said at one point that they're not taking off the table the possibility that they might hike rates. But the markets just did not even pay any much attention to that. They kind of ran to this view that he's more dovish. So I don't think there was any confusion, in what he said. But we'll see. I mean, it depends. A lot of things have to happen before the Fed starts cutting rates. It might not happen as quickly as the market now thinks. Some people think it'll happen in the fall. But we're just going to have to wait and see.
You wrote before today's announcement and press conference of no change in interest rates, you wrote, the Federal Reserve's main message to investors and markets is likely to be borrowed from the British government's World War II instruction to keep calm and carry on. Was that true?
Yeah, I think he was a little bit, it was that true, but maybe I should have pressed more on the fact that he met the market more than halfway. I mean, things are good now. Like, everything is going really well with inflation. The economy is looking well. So some of his message was to everyone, like, if these trends continue, we're going to be able to cut rates some, but it's a soft landing. So he was trying to tell people that things are good, and let's just take it for what it is.
This may be, last question, this may be outside of your purview, but if the economy is generally strong, why do poll numbers of the American people have them saying that it's not?
Well, that's because when everybody goes to the grocery store and buys groceries for the week, they know they're spending an additional $20 or $30 a time they go. Inflation over the last couple of years has really raised prices. Those price changes have stuck. A box of cereal used to cost like $4.75, now $7 or so. And that's all the way down the line. So people have less money. They feel less wealthy than they did. So I don't think it's a big surprise. People are going to be pushing for higher wages. It's going to be interesting to see whether they can get them. That's one of the things about this last mile on inflation bit, because if people get wages, then companies can keep prices high. So we'll have to see. But that's what it is, really. People have gotten hit right in their pocketbook and their wallets by inflation, and that's stung.
Greg Robb is a senior reporter for MarketWatch. You can find his stories at MarketWatch.com and on X, formerly Twitter, at GRob2000. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays.
Story from NBC News. Democratic lawmakers and the White House are considering giving the administration new powers to expel migrants from the country as part of a potential immigration overhaul to satisfy Republicans who are blocking Ukraine aid, according to two sources familiar with discussions. The sources also said that a significant expansion of migrant detention and deportation was on the table, although there is not even a formal framework of a deal at this point. Immigration advocacy groups are furious and are likening the proposed authority to Title 42, the COVID-era public health order implemented by former President Donald Trump that made it easier for the U.S. to expel migrants. That reporting from NBC News. Senator Tom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, spoke with reporters today about the negotiations.
We've seen now what the White House has sent over. I think to the extent that I've heard some Democrats express concern, I think that's progress. I've said all along that we have to be successful here, James has to negotiate something that gets 25 or more members. I won't vote for anything that has fewer than 24 other colleagues. But this is something to build on. And I, for one, think that we should stick around until we get it solved. I don't believe that we should leave next week. I think we need to stay here and negotiate it out.
You could support what the White House sent over?
We have to take a look at, I think it really is the first time it's kind of defined the framework, Manu. And so now it's more a matter of the specific language behind it. I like the idea of having something like Title 42. And here's what we're talking about. When we've been flooded with crossings to where we can do nothing but release them into the country. We can't vet them to a large extent. We can't consider an asylum claim. I think that the administration recognizing that that's bad policy is a good step. The question is, when you put it all together in language, to what extent does it reduce crossings? We're at 11,000. We've got to get somewhere closer to maybe at 2,000 a day, and let's figure out how we can get it done. But I think I'm going to take it as a good faith offer, which is why I think we have to act in good faith and stay here until we get it negotiated out.
If reports about what the White House is offering are accurate, those are some pretty major concessions from a lot of people's perspective. Were you surprised to see the White House
Not
making
at
those
all.
sorts
I mean,
of...
because candidly, number one, I think that they genuinely want funding for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
But number two, they genuinely want to get this yoke from off of their neck, which is called an out-of-control border, and the majority of the population, those who are going to vote next year, against this current policy. So I think it's a convergence of those two things. But we need to, people have said, well, the House is going to be out. We should wait till they get back. I don't buy that. I think let's do the work now so that when the House is back, they have something lying in their chamber that they can react to. And I believe by having a majority of our conference vote for it, it gives Mark Johnson an opportunity, or Speaker Johnson an opportunity to actually get it done.
Senator Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, speaking to reporters on Capitol Hill. He mentioned James, that's Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, the lead Senate Republican negotiating this deal dealing with border security and immigration. Over at the White House, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre talked in general about the negotiations over immigration and border security. And she said the need to reach an agreement with Republicans, not only because border security is important to the president, but also because the urgent need for more aid for Ukraine, as Republicans have now linked the two. But she declined to comment on any specific proposal on the table. Here was an exchange with CBS reporter Ed O'Keefe.
Just days after taking office and shortly after issuing that legislation that has gone nowhere in Congress regarding immigration and the border, the president issued an executive order saying he would, quote, restore and strengthen our own asylum system, which has been badly damaged by policies enacted over the last 4 years and contravened our values and caused needless human suffering. Our reporting, others' reporting, indicates the White House, through sources in the administration, is open to an authority that would allow it to suspend asylum processing when there's a spike in border crossings. Wouldn't that be a major policy reversal and revert back to the previous 4 years?
I'm just not going to go into sourcing from here. I'm not going to get into specifics. There are negotiations happening. Not going to negotiate from the podium. I'm going to let the conversation happen. We have to find a bipartisan compromise. That's what the president said. That's what the president believes in order to deal with this issue. And you started off your question asking, or laying out actually, that the president did put forth, and you laid that out in your question, a comprehensive immigration reform plan. He did that on day one, and it is going on 3 years. On 3 years.
He spent pushing that
on
bill
3 years. Here's the
because he's
thing.
met with them on foreign policy,
Right.
on fiscal cliffs,
And we
on
have,
budget,
and
it's never been about
I hear
immigration.
you, Ed, and we have regular conversations with congressional leaders and congressional staff about an array of issues, including this. I mean, you cannot send a bigger message to Congress and the American people when you say when you put out your first piece of legislation is on this issue, is on reforming immigration, right? Is on fixing.
Flat when you spend very little public time as president talking about the issue, meeting with congressional leaders on the issue specifically, or doing anything else other than having you come out here and say, we issued a bill on day one.
I disagree. It's not just issue a bill. Right? Not too long ago, back in the spring, we put forth policies on trying to make sure that, because Congress didn't help, on trying to put forth policies that tried to make the immigration system humane, right? Humane and actually dealing with the issue that we're seeing at the border. We have taken policy actions after policy actions without the help from Congress, right? And so that is being consistent here. And when you put forth the first piece of legislation to be on this issue that has been broken for decades, I mean, that's what he did as president. That's taking it very, very seriously.
Mitch McConnell alluded to a conversation he had with the president last week. I'm not asking you for names, but can you at least confirm that the president has spoken with lawmakers directly on the ongoing talks to get the supplemental done?
The president has been in regular touch with congressional leaders on this issue, and obviously so has his staff.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre being questioned by CBS News reporter Ed O'Keefe at today's White House briefing. Washington Today continues in a moment.
People often think C-SPAN is funded by the federal government. In fact, we're a nonprofit organization that receives no government funding. As news consumption changes, you can help ensure the future of C-SPAN's unfiltered coverage of national government and politics. We hope you'll consider making a tax-deductible contribution that will support our daily editorial operations. To learn more, visit cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free, and wherever you find your podcasts. The This story from thehill.com. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, is pressing President Biden to withhold $10.1 billion in military aid to Israel that would support the Israeli military's invasion of Gaza, arguing that the Netanyahu government's military offensive, quote, is being conducted in a deeply immoral way. In a December 12th letter to the president, Senator Sanders argues that Israel's military response in Gaza has turned into a mass atrocity and that it would be irresponsible to provide an additional $10.1 billion in military aid beyond the defensive systems that will protect Israeli civilians from incoming missiles and rocket attacks. The Vermont senator warned Israel's military campaign will be remembered among some of the darkest chapters of our modern history, noting that since October 7th, 18,000 civilians have been killed and 49,000 wounded, 70% of whom are women and children. This also in the Hill article. President Biden on Tuesday at a fundraiser offered some sharper criticism of the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, arguing Israel's bombing of Gaza has been indiscriminate and that this was eroding support for the country. At the White House briefing, John Kirby, a spokesperson for the National Security Council, taking some questions.
If the president believes Israel is engaging in indiscriminate bombing, wouldn't there be an obligation from the U.S. to put new conditions on military aid?
Every bit of security assistance we give any other country always comes with the expectation that the law of armed conflict is going to be respected and obeyed. As I said earlier, we're not going to assess every single airstrike here from this particular podium. That wouldn't be appropriate. The Israelis should speak to their operations, but we have every expectation, as I said to my previous answer there, that they will act in accordance with the law of armed conflict and do everything that they can to match their intent, which is to minimize civilian casualties.
But if they aren't, then isn't there an obligation for the U.S. to change the way that it's delivering military aid?
That's a hypothetical that I'm not prepared to engage in right now.
Hypothetical if he's saying indiscriminate bombing.
That's a hypothetical I'm not going to engage in. We have expressed our concerns, the president has, publicly and privately with the Israelis, about the need to reduce civilian casualties, and we'll continue to do that. I expect you'll see Jake address this too when he's in the region.
And on the hostages, is there a concern that hostages could be held in tunnels that are potentially being flooded?
Well, some of the hostages come out and said that they were held in tunnels, so it's not beyond possibility that Hamas could be holding at least some of them in tunnels as they move them around, which we have to expect that they'll do. But if you're asking about the flooding specifically, I'm not going to speak for Israeli military operations. They should speak to that. I would just say that we all need to remember the particular extra difficulty that they have going after a group like Hamas, which isn't just a terrorist group, but it also has sort of a military structure to it, and they deliberately tunnel under civilian infrastructure to allow for the movement of their fighters and for storing equipment and things. That adds an extra burden on the Israelis. And I would just say again, without confirming these reports about flooding, that as we've said before, we recognize their right and responsibility to go after Hamas, which is posing a particularly tactically difficult problem for them by using tunnels, but to do so in a way that reduces damage to civilian infrastructure above the ground and certainly reduces any chance of civilian casualties inside those tunnels, which would include hostages.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the White House National Security Council, taking reporters' questions during today's White House briefing. President Biden met privately today at the White House with more than a dozen family members of U.S. nationals held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. Also present were Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Principal Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner. After, some of the family spoke to reporters in the White House driveway.
My name is Jonathan Dekelchen. I'm the father of Sagi Dekelchen, a 35-year-old father who was abducted from Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. We met today with President Biden and other people from the administration. It was a terrific meeting and conversation. I think we all came away feeling that as families of hostages, of American-Israeli hostages, which are 8 out of a total of 138 hostages, we felt before, and we were only reinforced in seeing and believing that we could have no better friend in Washington or in the White House than President Biden himself and his administration.
Pope Francis today called for an immediate release of all the hostages. Do you believe the Vatican
can help bring your loved ones home.
I'll add, I'm Liz Hirschnoff-Talley. I'm Abigail Edon Moore's great aunt, and we are blessed because she is back with her family after she was a hostage for 50 days and witnessed both of her parents being murdered on October 7th. And what I can tell you is that Abigail is a miracle. She is a light in this very dark time. And metaphorically, a lot of our families that are here today, and we are all one big family looking to get all of these people's sons and fathers and mothers out, that we are here because the president and his team have been bringing out light in this dark time. And Abigail, who is a 4-year-old, is a symbol of that light. And as we come to the Christmas holiday, I hope that the Pope continues to speak and others around the world not only pray, but pray for us, pray for our families, pray for our leaders, pray for the president, and that the Pope and all that he can do is to push. We love a Christmas miracle. We would love all of our loved ones to come back and be with us for Christmas. So when you talk about the Pope, our hope is that he and others like himself will influence these people in the Middle East that are all actors in this part of getting these hostages out. And that is all of our hope for a Christmas miracle.
In the White House driveway today. Associated Press reporting from Doby, United Arab Emirates, that nearly 200 countries agreed Wednesday to move away from planet-warming fossil fuels, the first time they've made that crucial pledge in decades of UN climate talks, though many warned the deal still had significant shortcomings. The agreement was approved without the floor fight many feared, and is stronger than a draft floated earlier in the week that angered several nations. But it didn't call for an outright phasing out of oil, gas, and coal, and it gives nations significant wiggle room in their transition away from those fuels. That's how the Associated Press put it. John Kerry is U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. He has been at COP28, the UN Climate Summit in Dubai, and held a closing news conference.
For the very first time at a COP, fossil fuels have been on the table as a major part of our negotiations. And the decision that came out of this clearly embraces transitioning away from fossil fuels in energy systems so as to achieve net zero by 2050. That is a clear, unambiguous message on one of the most complicated issues that we face. And the first and easiest thing that countries need to do to make this commitment real is to stop building new unabated coal. And we will continue to fight for that. I'm very grateful for the efforts of people around the world who helped us reach this outcome. And there were just so many people engaged in this. I thank the folks at the White House who supported us, particularly on some difficult finance issues. We stepped up and stood up. And I think have changed the dynamic that existed in prior years before President Biden came to office. And I thank the President for his huge support on the climate frontier, not the least of which the major impact of the new legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act. Just a few months ago, youth organizers led more than 70,000 people in marching through the streets around the UN General Assembly calling for action on fossil fuels. Clearly, you all know we were outspoken about it, and I said in my press statement a week ago, we would have liked to have seen even greater ambition, yeah. And it was called for by the people around the world who understand the clear implication of how we burn fossil fuel and the nature of the climate crisis. So small island states, from whom we heard this morning a passionate call, and with whom we met many times in New York and here, for them, this is an immediate crisis, not something down the road and in the future. So we will continue to press for a more rapid transition. But we have the United Nations COP process clearly on record now as demanding that we fully embrace that transition.
John Kerry, U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate at the United Nations Climate Summit in Dubai, COP28 as it's known. More from the Associated Press story. Within minutes of opening Wednesday's session, COP28 President Sultan Al-Jaber gavelled in approval of the central document, an evaluation of how off track the world is on climate and how to get back on without giving critics a chance to comment. He hailed it as a historic package to accelerate climate action. Several minutes after Al-Jaber rammed the document through, Samoa's lead delegate, Anne Rasmussen, on behalf of small island nations, complained that they weren't even in the room when Al-Jaber said the deal was done. She said that the course correction that is needed has not been secured, with the deal representing business as usual instead of exponential emissions cutting efforts. She said the deal could potentially take us backward rather than forward. That was from Associated Press. Back in Washington, D.C., President Joe Biden speaking at a meeting of his National Infrastructure Advisory Council. A Gray News story explains that the council includes executive leaders from private sector and government who advise the White House on how to reduce physical and cyber risks and improve the security and resilience of the nation's critical infrastructure sectors.
Because it's not just about building infrastructure, it's about building better infrastructure, stronger infrastructure. Infrastructure can withstand 21st century challenges from climate change to cyber attacks to natural disasters to foreign threats and so much more. So what does all this mean? It means that when a hurricane hits, power is back on within hours instead of days or weeks. It means when a storm water surge, people don't lose access to clean water. It means when any disaster strikes, families can still text, call, and email to get help for the loved ones to see if they're okay. And look, it also means that when cyber actors try to hack pipelines, ports, grids, networks, they're detected and removed before they disrupt essential services. A lot of work. And that's why last year I asked this council to ensure that resilience is built into all of our infrastructure projects, including critical sections like energy, communications, transportation, and healthcare. Together, you delivered, especially on the key challenges. One, strengthening our water infrastructure. Two, boosting our resilience and expand our use of electricity as we expand our use of electricity across the economy.
President Joe Biden at a meeting of the National Infrastructure Advisory Council held in the Eisenhower Executive Office building. U.S. House Representatives voting today to allow whole milk and 2% milk back into school meals. Both have been banned since 2012 by the Agriculture Department in an effort to combat childhood obesity. Here's some of the debate on the floor. Congressman Glenn Grothman, Republican from Wisconsin, favoring the move.
For some reason, the current administration is waging war on milk. The USDA's current restrictions on school lunches are limiting nutritious options for kids. This comes at a time when it's found that 90% of Americans do not eat enough dairy to meet dietary recommendations. Drinking milk leads to better bone health and lower risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Additionally, milk stands as a leading and accessible source of 9 essential nutrients that children often fall short of. Proposed guidelines such as limiting milk options by age group and counting milk fat against weekly saturated allowance threaten to deprive students of essential nutrients. It is crucial that students have access to nutritional benefits of milk, and with these restrictions, they might choose to forego milk entirely if you have to drink the less tasty 1% or even worse, fat-free milk. These proposed restrictions ignore several recent research studies examining the effect of higher fat milk consumption, which found that it is associated with lower childhood obesity, and concluded that dietary guidelines that recommend reduced fat milk versions might not provide a benefit in lowering the risk of childhood obesity, which we are all for.
Congressman Glenn Grothman, Republican from Wisconsin, on the House floor. Another Wisconsin congressman, also Republican, Brian Stile, posting on X, Wisconsin is America's dairyland for a reason. In 2022, Wisconsin produced 31.9 billion pounds of milk, and he promotes on that post the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act, the name of the bill on the House floor. Opposing the bill, Congressman Bobby Scott, Democrat from Virginia, ranking member on the Education and Workforce Committee.
School meals are critical in reducing child hunger and providing children with the healthy foods they need. milk offered as part of these meals can help deliver essential nutrients that are vital to a child's development. That is why it is so important that we provide students with the most nutritious milk options. Child nutrition standards for school meals, including milk options, are guided by the Science-Based Dietary Guidelines for Americans, or the DGAs, which are periodically updated based on recommendations from child nutrition experts and input from the public. The latest DGAs, along with the American Heart Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and over a dozen other public health advocates agree that fat-free and low-fat milk are the healthiest options for children. Regrettably, H.R. 1147 attempts to legislate nutrition standards and disregard the evidence-based recommendations made by the DGAs.
Congressman Bobby Scott, Democrat from Virginia. The House went on to pass this bill by a vote of 330 to 99, all but one of the no votes coming from Democrats. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is currently considering rules that would ban chocolate milk and other flavored milk in elementary and middle schools because of the concern about added sugars. A congressional gold medal was awarded today to Larry Doby, the late Major League Baseball player and civil rights activist who, according to NorthJersey.com, broke through racial barriers to become the first black player to compete in the American League in 1947. He was the second black baseball player to play in Major League Baseball in the modern era behind Jackie Robinson and suffered through the same injustices throughout his playing career. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1998, and today is the 100th anniversary of the birth of Larry Doby. The sponsor of the law, and speaking at today's ceremony, Congressman Bill Pascrell, Democrat from New Jersey. New Jersey was Larry Doby's home from 1960 until his death in 2003.
The abuse Larry endured would have destroyed most people. Destroyed them. Unspeakable racism, countless threats. And all the time that I've known him, when I was young and wily, Larry Doby never said a negative word about us. Even some of his own teammates shunned him. Larry Doby endured because of his unshakable courage, because of his incredible character. We cannot forget that Larry Doby played ball before interleague games. He was the first black baseball player to visit the American League ballparks. The example he set did not just break the American League color barrier, it helped set in motion a civil rights revolution in these greatest United States. A Navy veteran, he was so proud of that. We honored Larry with a postage stamp, a post office. He is rightfully in the Hall of Fame. A gold medal for Congress was the next step, to remind Americans about his legacy. He was a good guy, a good man, a man of character.
Congressman Bill Pascrell, Democrat from New Jersey, at today's Statuary Hall ceremony in the U.S. Capitol, awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to Larry Doby. Some of the other speakers were House and Senate leaders, both parties, also some members from Ohio. Larry Doby played for the Cleveland Indians, and Larry Doby Jr. You can find the full video at cspan.org. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. It's free, and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.